planting drugs, laundering money, attempted murder on a fellow officer. These are just a few things we'll cover in the upcoming police corruption iceberg. Keeping in line with the structure of an iceberg, with relatively lighter cases at the top and the dark, depraved side at the bottom. Surface level. Lack of accountability. NYPD officer marijuana plantation scandal 2020. A Staten Island officer is being accused of planting marijuana inside a suspect's car in an attempt to get him falsely incarcerated. Luckily, his body cam was on and footage was recorded of him committing the vile act. The incident starts off with the officer pulling over Jason Serrano and his friend because of a broken taillight. However, things take a suspicious turn when the officer claims the car smells like weed and instructs the two to get out of the car so they can inspect it. Serrano, recovering from an abdominal injury, tries to explain to the officers that he can't move, but the officer pays no heed to his pain and still has him step out of the car. Once he is out, the officer attempts an illegal search on him, and when Serrano tries to refuse, they manhandle him onto the ground and handcuff him. The two officers, Erickson and Pastrana, then proceed to search the car to find evidence, but get agitated once they realize they can't spot anything. While that situation should have ended there, body camera footage showed something horrifying. Erickson placing weed flakes in the front center console of the car and then putting some weed inside Serrano's jacket as well. It was an attempt at fabrication of evidence at its worst, and Serrano was arrested because of it. The video itself surfaced 2 years later and reflects the corruption in the police force. The New York City ticket-fixing scandal, 2011. The Bronx ticket-fixing scandal ensnared over 100 NYPD officers, with some facing potential indictment. This NYPD magic trick involved Bronx cops allegedly disappearing tickets, often in exchange for gifts. The 2-year investigation, which was shrouded in secrecy at times, became clearer as more information emerged. In the aftermath, 17 cops were charged with bribery, larceny, perjury, and obstruction. Within the police department, an additional 100 officers received non-criminal punishments. Eugene O'Donnell, a former cop and professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, emphasized the gravity of the scandal, citing doctored tickets and possible quid pro quo exchanges. The main issue appeared to be caused by a broken system that allowed for creative editing after ticket submission. The case involved police officers, including union delegates, and the NYPD Internal Affairs Division, which used numerous wiretaps and collected thousands of hours of recorded conversations. Adding to the complexity, the approximately 100 cops who have not been indicted but have been internally disciplined may face challenges as witnesses in court due to the potential taint on their credibility. The irony is that the investigation allegedly began by accident when a Bronx barber called his cop son to fix a ticket. Unbeknownst to them, the NYPD was tapping their phones as part of an unrelated drug investigation. Unintended consequences continued to unfold as the scandal shed light on missing tickets and the ramifications for those involved. Chicago Police Department red light camera scandal 2021. Emil Jones III, D. Chicago, an Illinois state senator, faced federal charges for bribery and lying to the FBI. The allegations center on him accepting $5,000 and a job offer for an associate from a SafeSpeed connected individual, a company that installs red light cameras. In exchange, Jones allegedly promised to exclude SafeSpeed from specific sections of a 2019 proposed state bill pertaining to a study on automated traffic enforcement systems such as red light cameras. Despite claims that these cameras reduce speeding, the city experienced more fatal crashes in 2021 than in 2020 or 2019. Red light cameras, another major revenue source, have also been linked to corruption. In 2016, a former Chicago official was sentenced to 10 years in prison after accepting $2 million in bribes from a different red light camera company. In 2020, the city issued over 500,000 red light camera tickets worth more than $52 million. Senator Jones is not the only politician accused of having improper ties to SafeSpeed. The company has been linked to corruption investigations involving other Chicago suburb officials. A federal investigation is currently underway, alleging that officials obtained SafeSpeed deals in exchange for favors. The company denies wrongdoing and blames the problems on a former employee, Omar Maani, who signed a deferred prosecution agreement in 2020 and is cooperating with authorities. Despite Governor J.B. Pritzker's call for Jones's resignation, he remains in the state Senate. serving only as chair of the Senate Licensed Activities Committee. Jones, who is unopposed for re-election, maintains his innocence while urging the public not to jump to conclusions. Although red light cameras continue to generate revenue, a dispute between Oakbrook and Oakbrook Terrace highlights their contentious role. Oakbrook wants to turn off Oakbrook Terrace's red light cameras. The latter, led by a former mayor involved in the scandal, refuses. The State Department of Transportation temporarily turned off Oakbrook Terrace's cameras, but the town obtained a restraining order to reactivate them, highlighting the contentious nature of these systems and their perceived prioritization of revenue over public safety. The Tarnished Badge Scandal 2000. In the early 2000s, Robeson County, North Carolina faced a dark chapter when the Operation Tarnished Badge investigation revealed widespread corruption within the sheriff's office. Led by charismatic former Sheriff Glenn Maynor, the scandal implicated 23 people, mostly law enforcement officers, in a variety of criminal activities. Maynor's misdeeds included hiring county deputies for personal tasks like landscaping and even staffing, while falsely recording their hours as on-duty work. However, the situation quickly escalated beyond resource misuse. Maynor's deputies were heavily involved in criminal activities such as kidnapping, racketeering, theft, money laundering, and drug trafficking. The once respected sheriff's badge became a symbol of deception. Maynor's downfall accelerated when he admitted to lying to a grand jury about his knowledge of criminal activity within his department. In September, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to misappropriate property and perjury before a federal grand jury. This was a significant fall from grace for a sheriff who'd been with the county for a decade. The investigation, sparked by reports of drug dealers being mistreated by law enforcement, revealed a pervasive culture of corruption within the Robeson County Sheriff's Office. Operation Tarnished Badge shattered the community's trust in law enforcement by exposing how some officers deviated from their sworn duties. The consequences were severe, with Maynor and others facing prison. Maynor received a sentence that exceeded federal guidelines while serving part of his term under house arrest. The aftermath had a long-term impact on the county's law enforcement, causing a rift in trust and raising concerns about the integrity of those entrusted with badges. Operation Tarnished Badge highlighted the corruption's widespread impact on the department's operations and reputation. Middle level, organized corruption. Cleveland Police Department Scandal 2014. Taurus Moore, Antonio Malone, and Eric Jones, three former East Cleveland police officers, were indicted in federal court in 2014. The charges stemmed from their alleged involvement in a conspiracy in which they illegally searched and fabricated reports to seize thousands of dollars from suspected drug dealers. Taurus Moore, a 42-year-old South Euclid resident, worked as a sergeant at the East Cleveland Police Department where he oversaw the street crime unit. Antonio Malone, aged 33 of Cleveland, and Eric Jones, 38 of Cleveland Heights, were detectives assigned to the same unit. The indictment described a conspiracy that lasted from 2012 to June 2014. During this time, the officers were accused of unauthorized entry, exceeding the lawful scope of entry, conducting illegal searches and seizures, and abusing their authority to seize money and property from alleged drug dealers. The officers were accused of using falsified reports, affidavits, and other documents to conceal their illegal activities. The illegal searches were not limited to East Cleveland, but extended throughout Greater Cleveland. The indictment stated that false information was intentionally included in police reports. Taurus Moore, the unit's supervisor, was accused of being aware of the inaccuracies but failing to correct them. The indictment mentions several specific incidents. One instance involved the execution of a search warrant based on false information, which resulted in the seizure of $20,000. The officers allegedly divided the money amongst themselves. In another incident, Malone forcibly entered a padlocked room and seized approximately $100,000 in cash without a proper search warrant. The officers allegedly met later to divide the funds among themselves. Malone was also accused of taking $3,000 from a known drug trafficker during an arrest and instructing the individual to leave behind a portion of the money. He did not record the money on the vehicle's inventory form. East Cleveland Police Chief Michael Cardilli acknowledged the investigation, stating that it was prompted by public complaints and FBI information. Mayor Gary Norton emphasized the importance of citizen complaints in initiating investigations and assured the public that any cases of police misconduct would be thoroughly investigated. U.S. Attorney Steve Dettelbach strongly condemned the officers' actions, emphasizing their violation of the public trust and duty to serve and protect. The legal proceedings were expected to shed light on the scope of the alleged conspiracy and the consequences for those involved in such heinous behavior in law enforcement. Tucson Police Department Scandal 2019. In 2019, a disturbing case arose involving a former Tucson police officer, Richard Daniel, 33, who allegedly committed misconduct by using his position to obtain sexual favors. The incident began on January 13th when Officer Daniel approached a woman at her apartment complex in response to a report about her altercation with a clerk at a 7-Eleven, according to an interim complaint filed in Pima County Justice Court. According to the court filing, during questioning, Officer Daniel informed the woman that she had an outstanding warrant and offered not to arrest her if she had sex with him. In order to avoid the officer's advances, the woman pretended to be pregnant in the hopes that he would back off. Undeterred, Daniel proposed going to another location for a sexual encounter. To avoid leaving with him, the woman suggested that he come to her apartment, contingent on her husband's approval. According to the complaint, the woman's husband confronted the officer about the proposition after recognizing Daniel from a previous visit. When questioned about the seriousness of his intentions, Daniel allegedly shrugged. The husband then left the apartment and went to the 7-Eleven to inquire about the earlier confrontation. After the sexual encounter, Daniel allegedly warned the woman that she needed to address her outstanding warrant or face arrest before leaving. The husband filed a complaint against Daniel 4 days later, prompting investigators to search the apartment. Daniel's DNA was reportedly discovered inside. When the Tucson Police Department learned of the allegations, it took immediate action. Daniel had been a 3-year veteran of the department. Daniel was arrested and then released from jail. According to Assistant Chief of Police Carla Johnson, he was placed on unpaid leave and served with a notice of intent to terminate his employment. Johnson emphasized the gravity of the situation, saying that if the allegations against Officer Daniel were true, his actions were appalling and did not reflect the broader law enforcement community's commitment to serving and protecting the public. She affirmed that the department takes such allegations seriously, emphasizing the importance of accountability in maintaining public trust. The Silk Road Task Force Corruption, 2015. In October 2013, DEA agent Carl Force was investigating Silk Road, a secretive online marketplace for illegal goods. Force had personal Bitcoin schemes in the hopes of striking it rich. One scheme involved deceiving Silk Road's leader, Dread Pirate Roberts, or Ross Albright. Force had been milking Albright for Bitcoins but then decided to wash his hands of them. In an attempt to convert these digital assets into real cash, he quickly set up an account with Bitstamp, a Slovenian Bitcoin exchange. However, opening Bitstamp account number 557042 on October 12, 2013 sealed his fate. Force duped Albright into handing over more than 1,200 Bitcoins, hoping to launder the money through Bitstamp, unaware of the consequences. The investigation began, not only exposing Force's shady dealings, but also bringing another agent into the spotlight, Sean Bridges. On May 30, 2014, Force owned up to his crimes during a proffer session led by DOJ's Catherine Horn and IRS agent Tigran Gambarian. Force admitted to misappropriating government bitcoins as NOB on Silk Road, but claimed it was a misunderstanding due to Bitcoin's novelty. Horn saw through the excuse, and Gambarian, who was investigating Silk Road, confirmed Force's aliases, French Maid and Death from Above, which linked him to PGP signatures. Gambarian discovered a crucial link in December 2014. Albright was responsible for the 525 Bitcoin payment. Using Wallet Explorer, he unraveled complex Bitcoin transfers, suspecting another accomplice. Gambarian informed Horn that evidence pointed to the Baltimore Silk Road Task Force's involvement in the Bitcoin heist, which was a significant revelation. The link between Force and Bridges became clearer, signaling a breakthrough for the investigators. As the investigators considered charges against DEA agent Carl Force, they suspected his involvement in the Silk Road drug dealer's massive theft. After discovering the number 13 account had sent stolen bitcoins to Mt. Gox, they used an MLAT procedure to obtain Japanese bankruptcy trustee records. These revealed the funds were transferred to a Fidelity account called Quantum Investments, which belonged to Secret Service agent Sean Bridges. Fidelity's subpoena quickly exposed Bridges, who resigned on March 15, 2015, after becoming aware of the investigation. Following the discovery of a second major thief, Bridges, Assistant U.S. Attorney William Frenson joined the case. Bridges was arrogant during a proffer session, claiming they lacked crucial evidence. However, the investigators discovered the records he thought were lost. Within a month, Sean Bridges and Carl Force pleaded guilty. Bridges received a 71-month sentence, while Force was sentenced to 78 months. Force served his prison term in Kentucky, while Bridges was incarcerated at the Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution in Indiana. Homan Square Black Site, 2014 to 2015. The Chicago Police Department locks up Americans inside what lawyers describe as the local version of a CIA black site, making them inaccessible to family members or counsel. The location, a plain warehouse in Homan Square on the west side of Chicago, has long been the focus of covert operations by special police teams. Nobody brought to Homan Square is reported to be booked, in contrast to a precinct. Unlike when someone is booked at a precinct, witnesses, suspects, or other Chicagoans who wind up inside do not seem to have a public searchable record placed into a database stating where they are. Even though their clients are still being held within Homan Square, most attorneys who have tried to enter the building are turned away. Interviews with neighborhood lawyers and one protester who was shackled in Homan Square for more than a day reveal practices that restrict access to fundamental constitutional rights. According to a resident of Chicago, he was purposefully placed in an overheated room where he was zip-tied to a bench for hours, and he was forced to make false statements in an attempt to end his agony. A friend of Wright's, who was arrested during the same police raid, spoke of the horrendous treatment he received at the facility known as Homan Square, including assaults on his genitalia and face. Almost 6,000 people detained in the facility between August 2004 and June 2015 were black, accounting for more than double the percentage of the city's total population. Before they were formally processed, more than 7,000 persons passed through the compound. Shockingly, only 68 of the 7,000 prisoners were allowed to see their attorneys. As a result of these horrifying revelations, for 41 days in 2016, people camped out in front of Homan Square. Together with other black-led organizations, the collective returned to the lot on Friday to commemorate the abolitionist vision of Freedom Square and to demand that the Chicago Police Department be defunded by the city. The NYPD's 77th Precinct Scandal, 2010. In October 2010, the 77th Precinct became embroiled in a controversy after allegations of manipulated crime statistics prompted an internal investigation. The investigation began with an unsettling surge of unfounded cases reported by the precinct, which raised concerns and prompted further investigation. The focus of this investigation was whether felony grand larcenies were reduced to misdemeanors and whether burglaries were converted into criminal mischief charges. Disturbingly, the previous year's statistics revealed a story of conflicting trends. Burglaries, robberies, and felony assaults skyrocketed with alarming double-digit increases, while grand larcenies had auto-recorded single-digit declines. The statistical anomaly had thrust Inspector John Cosgrove, the precinct commander, during the relevant period into the spotlight. Allegations had surfaced suggesting that Cosgrove may have played a role, whether directly or indirectly, in encouraging the manipulation of crime numbers. The discontent within the ranks of the 77th Precinct had been brewing for some time, and as a result, officers came forward to expose alleged manipulations of crime statistics. Officer Adrian Schoolcraft of the 81st Precinct was one of the first to bring these allegations to public attention, and he's currently involved in a $50 million lawsuit against the department, attempting to uncover the truth in court. He exposed systematic crime underreporting at Brooklyn's 81st Precinct. The internal NYPD investigation, completed that year but kept confidential, supported his claims of felonies being downgraded and reports not being filed. Schoolcraft was suspended and placed in involuntary hospitalization. The internal report revealed a deliberate effort to underreport crimes, which led to 7 officers being disciplined and the precinct commander being transferred. Despite his suspension, Schoolcraft filed a federal lawsuit against the NYPD, seeking accountability and justice. Meanwhile, officers at the 79th Precinct had initiated a summons boycott, leading to the transfer of their controversial supervisor. As the new year dawned, NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly responded to growing concerns by forming a committee to investigate and dissect how the NYPD recorded crime statistics. The overall crime rate in the 77th Precinct, which includes Prospect Heights and Crown Heights, increased more than any other neighborhood in the city in 2010. There were 1,366 reported incidents in 2010, compared to 1,164 in 2009, representing a 17% increase. The unfolding saga in the 77th Precinct added another layer of complexity to the ongoing dialogue about police accountability and the veracity of crime reporting in Brooklyn. Deeper middle level, narcotics and extortion. NYPD Officer Cocaine Trafficking 2019. In 2018, Johnny Diaz, an officer in the NYPD, arrested a person he thought was a drug dealer but was in fact an undercover NYPD officer. The interesting twist of the situation is that the undercover agent was looking into claims that Diaz, 48, gave arrestees money in exchange for the dismissal of their criminal cases. While Diaz must have thought he was the one taking the cop into custody, it was the undercover cop who was actually investigating him in return. As part of the plan, the undercover cop allegedly gave Diaz half a kilogram of cocaine and $18,000 in cash. However, Diaz only recorded receiving $17,000 in cash. Officials claim that after being arrested, Diaz started interacting socially with the undercover cop, gave him his phone number, and told him to message him via the encrypted messaging app WhatsApp. Furthermore, it was reported by the undercover cop that Diaz took a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label Scotch from him as a thank you gift for taking his cell phone out of the evidence room during the inquiry. In addition, Diaz reportedly consented to assist in having the undercover officer's case dropped in exchange for roughly $20,000 in cash, of which he took $7,500 as a down payment, according to the district attorney's office. According to the authorities, Diaz took $4,000 on June 15th in exchange for helping the undercover agent move cocaine from the Bronx to the Harlem area of West 125th Street and Broadway. Additionally, he allegedly gave the undercover cop instructions to drive cautiously, refrain from using his phone, and notify any police officers who might stop the car to speak with Diaz, who was in a transport truck behind the undercover cop. According to Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr., Johnny Diaz received a 6-year jail sentence for his assistance in transporting a kilogram of cocaine in exchange for $4,000 in cash. On August 14th, Diaz entered a guilty plea to charges of second-degree criminal possession of a controlled drug, second-degree bribery, and petite larceny. Atlanta Police Officer Drug Trafficking 2020. On May 30th, 2020, a black couple was dragged out of their car and arrested by Atlanta police officers during a traffic rush caused by the George Floyd protests. In a dramatic body camera video that police published, a number of policemen can be seen shouting commands, smashing the driver's side window, using stun guns, and removing Pilgrim and Messiah Young from the car. Throughout the incident, the pair can be heard screaming and asking the officers what's going on, but their cries go unheard. The video begins with cops putting another young man under arrest next to a line of stopped cars on a downtown roadway. The man is begging the cops to release him, claiming he hasn't done anything. The black couple pulls up to the scene in a car, and Messiah begins recording the events of the arrest on his phone, which agitates the Atlanta officers. They attempt to stop Messiah from leaving, however he closes his car window and tries to drive off. The officer catches up with his car, and all hell breaks loose. As Pilgrim tries to exit the car, an officer stuns her with a stun gun in the front passenger seat. The woman starts to scream as the officers remove her from the car. Another officer breaks the window after hitting it several times. The young couple later claimed that the officers also slashed the tires. Meanwhile, Messiah is also tased for a total of 10 seconds by the officer, who then claims the black man had a gun. Unfortunately, police reports did not find any firearm at the scene. As a result of the brutality they committed on the young couple, all 6 officers were charged with excessive force, with 2 of them being fired and 3 of them being put on desk duty. The Cocaine Cop Scandal 2019. The tow truck scheme, which began in September 2016, involved 2 officers, Smith and Hassett, who directed damaged vehicles from car accidents to a specific towing and auto repair company in exchange for cash bribe payments. Smith and Hassett began the victim database scheme in January 2020, providing names and identifying information of recent automobile accident victims from NYPD databases to an individual in exchange for cash. intending to sell the information to physical therapy businesses and personal injury lawyers. Following his retirement in January 2020, Smith looked for opportunities to transport illegal narcotics. In July 2020, he accepted a bag containing what he believed to be a kilogram of heroin from an undercover law enforcement officer and transported it to another location in Queens in exchange for a cash payment of around $1,200. United States Attorney Breon Peace emphasized the NYPD's zero tolerance for corruption, claiming that corrupt officers such as Smith and his co-defendants undermine the public's trust in law enforcement. The sentencing sends a message that the authorities will thoroughly investigate and prosecute corrupt public officials. NYPD Commissioner Keechant L. Sewell echoed the department's commitment to prosecuting corrupt public officials, emphasizing the impact such actions have on public trust in law enforcement and the reputation of honorable police officers. Former New York City Police Department or NYPD officer Robert Smith was sentenced to 97 months in prison in federal court in Brooklyn for bribery and attempting to transport heroin using interstate facilities. Smith, who retired in March 2020, was assigned to Queens' 105th Precinct during the relevant period. In October 2021, he pleaded guilty to the charges. Smith referred to himself in criminal terms during recorded conversations, calling himself one of the most corrupt cops in the 105. Heather Bush, Smith's co-defendant and a former NYPD police officer, was sentenced to 6 months in prison in February 2022 for bribery involving interstate facilities. Another co-defendant, former NYPD officer Robert Hassett, pleaded guilty in October 2021 to conspiracy to violate the Travel Act and is awaiting sentencing. Gun Trace Task Force Scandal 2017. The Gun Trace Task Force, or GTTF, scandal in the Baltimore City Police Department is a notable example of corruption and misconduct in law enforcement. The scandal involved members of the GTTF, a unit formed to combat gun violence and crime in Baltimore. 8 members of the unit were charged with extortion, robbery, racketeering, and overtime fraud. The DEA, or Drug Enforcement Administration, became involved after hearing a GTTF member, Gondo, confess to a drug dealing on tape. Gondo's arrest sparked a larger investigation, which revealed widespread corruption within the GTTF. But beyond drug trafficking, the range of crimes committed by GTTF officers is astonishing. They targeted suspected drug dealers, carried fake weapons to plant on unarmed people in case they were shot, and even sold stolen firearms and drugs to criminals. Surprisingly, there were instances where officers stole house keys, found the owner's home, and stole $100,000 from a safe inside. In a 2016 incident, officers arrested a couple without evidence of a crime, and when they discovered they had $40,000 at home, they went there and took $20,000. Officers also admitted to illegally placing tracking devices on the vehicles of suspected drug dealers. This helped them break into the dealers' homes, stealing any guns or drugs they discovered, and subsequently selling them. The GTTF is estimated to have stolen at least $300,000, along with 43 pounds of marijuana, 800 grams of heroin, 3 kilos of cocaine, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in jewelry. Thomas Allers, Wayne Jenkins, Mamadou Gondo, Evodio Hendricks, Jamel Ryam, and Maurice Ward pleaded guilty to various charges, while Daniel Hersel and Marcus Taylor were convicted in 2018. Gondo, Ward, Hendricks, and Ryam testified against Hersel and Taylor as part of the DOJ investigation. Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, the unit's leader, pleaded guilty to multiple charges, receiving a 25-year sentence, the harshest. Hersel and Taylor were sentenced to 18 years each. Other involved officers received sentences ranging from 7 to 12 years, including Eric Snell, a former BPD officer with ties to the GTTF and later a Philadelphia police officer. Bottom level: violent criminal enterprise. The Special Operations Section Scandal, Chicago 2007. Between 2003 and 2006, 4 former Chicago police officers from the disbanded Special Operations Section, or SOS, an elite citywide unit, were charged with federal civil rights violations for allegedly presenting false information and testimony to conceal unlawful searches or arrests during which hordes of cash were frequently stolen. 2 of the former officers were also charged with federal tax offenses, and one of them, Jerome A. Finnegan, was previously charged with allegedly planning the murder for hire of a former fellow officer who could testify against him. The civil rights charges were new, and the other 3 defendants were charged with federal crimes for the first time, following a lengthy joint state-federal investigation into the actions of rogue officers within the disbanded special unit. 7 other former SOS officers had already pleaded guilty to state charges and been sentenced. Finnegan and former officer Keith A. Herrera were charged with conspiracy to violate individuals' civil rights, along with other unnamed officers assigned to the SOS. Finnegan and Herrera are accused of making routine and regular illegal arrests and searches while conducting criminal investigations, and when the opportunity arose, they stole cash from those arrested and the locations being searched. According to the charges, Finnegan received approximately $200,000 in stolen funds between 2004 and 2005, while Herrera received approximately $40,000 in 2005, all of which came from a larger pool of approximately $600,000 that was allegedly stolen in 5 separate episodes between 2004 and 2005. All 4 defendants, through their attorneys, gave the government permission to reveal that they would plead guilty to the charges filed. Finnegan and Herrera were also facing related state charges, which the Cook County State's Attorney's Office intended to dismiss once the federal charges were resolved. Finnegan, 48, who joined the police department in 1988, has been in federal custody and resigned since his arrest in September 2007. Herrera, 33, who joined the department in 2000, has also resigned. They were each charged with 1 count of civil rights conspiracy and 1 count of filing a false federal income tax return, with Finnegan facing a single count of murder for hire. Both were scheduled to be arraigned in U.S. District Court at a later date. Former officer Stephen Del Bosque, 35, who joined the department in 2000 and has since resigned, and Eric J. Olson, 37, who joined the department in 1995 and is on callback status, have each been charged with misdemeanor civil rights violations in separate criminal complaints. Both also gave the government permission to reveal that they would plead guilty to the charges and would be arraigned later in U.S. District Court. These serious charges do not reflect the behavior of the thousands of police officers who risk their lives every day to serve honorably and with integrity, said Patrick J. Fitzgerald, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. Following a thorough investigation, the SOS was disbanded, and other defendants were prosecuted in state courts. Mr. Fitzgerald announced the federal charges alongside Anita Alvarez, Cook County State's Attorney, Robert D. Grant, Special Agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Chicago office, and Elvin Patton, Special Agent in charge of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The civil rights conspiracy charge alleged that Finnegan and Herrera, along with other unnamed SOS officers, used and agreed to use their positions and authority as police officers to unlawfully stop and detain people, unlawfully search people and their homes, deprive people of money without due process of law, and charge people with crimes based on false evidence. According to the charges, a notable incident occurred on February 14, 2004, when person A was arrested for cocaine distribution. As a result, approximately 33 kilograms of cocaine and $30,000 to $35,000 in cash were seized from person A's garage and home. However, the officers falsely reported only $10,000, implying a deliberate misrepresentation. Additional instances of corruption occurred during an illegal traffic stop on September 18, 2004, which targeted person C. Without a warrant or consent, the officers conducted an illegal search of person C's home on South Luna, stealing approximately $450,000 in cash and dividing it among themselves. On November 11, 2004, Finnegan, Herrera, and their accomplices conducted an illegal traffic stop on North Laramie. Following person D's release, an unwarranted search of his West Haddon home resulted in the theft of approximately $10,000 in cash, which was distributed among the officers. Following media reports of person D's claims, Herrera and his colleagues provided false statements to the Internal Affairs Division, denying any wrongdoing. These egregious incidents collectively highlight a troubling pattern of corruption within the police force, emphasizing the importance of sustained and vigilant efforts to root out systemic misconduct and restore public trust in law enforcement. The Danziger Bridge shootings, 2005. Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, and the aftermath of it left the city flooded and in chaos, with the breakdown of law and order. As a result, the New Orleans Police Department was tasked with restoring order in the city. In September of 2005, the Bartholomew family and a group of civilians were attempting to cross the Danziger Bridge when they encountered NOPD officers. Sergeant Kenneth Bowen, Sergeant Robert Giusevius, Officer Anthony Villavasso, and Officer Robert Falcon were among the cops. The officers showed up in a budget rental truck. None of them were wearing uniforms, and they carried firearms, including an M4 carbine assault rifle and an AK-47, at least one of which was not authorized. The officers had been dispatched to the scene after they received reports of gunfire in the area. However, the civilians were clearly unarmed and not a threat. But unfortunately, that isn't how the officers perceived the situation, and so opened fire on them blindly. The shooting resulted in an immediate fatality as 17-year-old James Brissett was killed on the spot, a family friend of the Bartholomew family. Susan Bartholomew was shot in the arm and later had to get it amputated. Her husband, Leonard, was shot 3 times, once in the back, the head, and the foot. Bartholomew's teenage daughter, Lesha, was shot 4 times, and a friend of the Brissetts, Jose Holmes Jr., was shot in the abdomen, the hand, and the jaw. 2 brothers, Lance and Ronald, attempted to flee from the scene but were chased down by Giusevius and Falcon in a vehicle. Falcon fired his rifle at Ronald and 5 bullets hit him in the back, and since he was already a developmentally disabled man, he couldn't tolerate his injuries and later died from them. Lance was then taken into custody and wrongfully charged with attempting to kill police officers. The sad part is that no weapons were recovered on the scene, and both the police and the civilians testified that the victims were unarmed. NOPD shooters tried to cover up their crimes by making up stories of how the civilians had fired at them first. Detective Arthur Kaufman was assigned to the case as the lead investigator, and while it seemed like he would get to the bottom of it, he instead conspired with the defendants by concealing evidence. As a result, he tried to make it seem like the shootings were justified when they were anything but that. In fact, NOPD Lieutenant Michael Lohman urged the defendants to lie about what actually happened at the scene, and even had a firearm planted at the shooting site. Regardless of their lies, all the officers were taken into custody. Giusevius, Bowen, and Villavasso were charged with first-degree murder of Brissett, while Falcon got the same charge for the murder of Madison. Additionally, NOPD officers Michael Hunter, Ignatius Hills, and Robert Barrios were charged with attempted murder for trying to kill the other 4 victims. The Federal Police Kidnappings, Mexico 2011. In 2011, a shocking revelation unfolded involving members of the Mexican Federal Police. These officers were accused of not only being involved in a series of kidnappings, but also abducting innocent civilians. To make matters worse, they allegedly falsely accused these unsuspecting individuals of being associated with drug cartels. Fast forward to the consequences, a total of 18 people, with 13 identified as Mexican Federal Police officers, found themselves under arrest. The suspicion hung heavily over them, suggesting their involvement in a sinister kidnapping ring operating in the troubled Pacific resort city of Acapulco. Arrests brought President Enrique Peña Nieto's administration under scrutiny. Federal security spokesman Eduardo Sanchez Hernandez painted a positive picture, framing police officer arrests as a display of President Peña Nieto's commitment to combat corruption within public service. He pointed out that 81 federal police officers have been apprehended during Peña Nieto's tenure. Hernandez further stressed the government's zero-tolerance stance on corruption among public servants, expressing regret over the betrayal of citizens by those sworn to protect them. Led by 31-year-old Luis Miguel González Petitán, a group of 5 civilians and several police officers, including a 51-year-old, were apprehended by authorities. The charges? Involvement in at least 7 homicides and 4 kidnappings, with 2 kidnapping victims tragically losing their lives. Despite efforts to weed out corruption, the testing procedures for police officers in Mexico have faced criticism for being poorly administered. This has resulted in the dismissal of competent officers and the retention of questionable ones. In a recent TV interview, Manuel Mondragon Calb, the Federal Security Commissioner, expressed uncertainty about whether the arrested officers had undergone the testing. He admitted to flaws in the testing process and expressed hope that lawmakers would take steps to improve the system. Even with former President Calderon's focus on the federal police, which included salary increases and the hiring of more educated officers, the force's reputation remains tarnished by high-profile scandals. For instance, 14 federal officers are still behind bars for opening fire on an American SUV with diplomatic plates in 2012, injuring 2 CIA officers. The news wasn't expected to cast a favorable light on Acapulco either, a city plagued by drug cartels and criminal gangs that have turned it from Hollywood royalty's playground to Mexico's highest homicide rate city. Henry Glover Case, 2005. Following the devastation caused by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the tragic story of Henry Glover unfolded on the streets of Algiers, New Orleans. Glover, who survived the catastrophic storm, met an untimely death at the hands of a New Orleans police officer just days after embarking on a mission to find supplies to sustain his family in the aftermath of the disaster. Glover and his friend Bernard Calloway set out on September 2, 2005 in search of necessary supplies. What had begun as a survival mission quickly turned into a nightmare. Calloway returned exclaiming that Ace, Glover's affectionate nickname, had been shot. Rolanda Short, Glover's fiancée, raced to the scene and discovered him lying in the street, suffering from a gunshot wound in the chest. When William Tanner, a neighbor attempting to assist, was confronted with an unexpected eruption of police brutality, the horrific story became more complicated. Tanner and Glover's brother watched helplessly as Glover, who was handcuffed and beaten mercilessly, was left with severe injuries, received no medical attention, and sadly passed away in the back of a car. Officer Greg McRae commandeered the vehicle, drove it away, and set it on fire in a heinous attempt to destroy evidence. 7 agonizing days passed before Glover's remains were discovered, bringing the case out of the shadows as the FBI intervened, launching a thorough investigation into the heartbreaking circumstances surrounding Glover's premature death. As the investigation progressed, disturbing details emerged, painting a bleak picture of Officer David Warren shooting Glover because he mistook him for a looter. A wrongful death lawsuit was filed in 2010, prompting Warren's arrest for murder and McRae's arrest for attempting to obliterate crucial evidence. Following a riveting trial, Warren was convicted of manslaughter with a firearm and sentenced to 25 years in prison. McRae, convicted of obstruction of justice, faced a 17-year sentence. However, the path of justice took an unexpected turn in 2012 when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned their convictions due to procedural concerns. Officer David Warren was acquitted after a retrial in 2013, whereas Officer Greg McRae was awaiting a new trial in the ongoing Henry Glover case. This tragic story played out in the legal system, leaving an indelible imprint on the pursuit of truth and accountability. Beyond the courtroom, the Henry Glover case sparked societal awareness, prompting reflection on the difficulties of seeking justice, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The echoes of this tragic episode reverberate, urging society to address deep-seated issues in cases of police misconduct. Settlements between the Glover family and the city of New Orleans heightened the impact, emphasizing the complex interplay between justice, accountability, and the weight of tragedy. The Henry Glover case serves as a poignant reminder of the difficulties in pursuing justice, advocating for systemic change, and fostering meaningful reform in law enforcement.